Okay guys, Drew from Law Guitars. I'm here with Warren Haynes, who is touring in support of his latest solo relief, Man in Motion. How you doing, Warren?
Good.
How's the tour treating you so far?
It's been great. We're having a great time. We have a 2-week break coming up day after tomorrow, so that's nice, but it's been a really great tour.
How long did it take you to write this record?
Well, in some ways, 20 years, because there's 2 or 3 songs on the record that are really old. Your Wildest Dreams and On a Real Lonely Night and Save Me are all between 10 and 20 years old. The rest of the record I wrote in about a 1.5 or 2 year window right before we made the record. Once I realized that I was writing a lot of soul music, then it dawned on me, oh, I have some older songs that I've always wanted to record that might fit in perfectly. So it kind of worked out good. They really fit in great with the rest of the stuff that I was writing. The influence goes back all the way to the very beginning. For me, my first love was soul music. I started singing before I started playing guitar, and at that time I was only interested in James Brown and Wilson Pickett and Otis Redding and the Four Tops and the Temptations and Sam and Dave. A few years later, when I would hear Cream and Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter, that's what led me to wanting to play guitar. But prior to that, soul music was completely my obsession. So the songs and the production and the approach to this record go all the way back to that, and then combining the blues guitar influence of people like B.B. King and Freddie King and Albert King, and then of course just the obvious rock influence, whatever's come about throughout my life and studying music, because it's not really meant to be a tribute to a certain era. It's just a collection of new songs that kind of reflect that era.
Now, in terms of the approach to this record, was your approach natural, or was it guided towards doing this record differently from, for instance, a Government Mule record?
Well, the first thing I realized was that the songs that I was writing were not really meant to be Government Mule songs. They weren't really meant to be Allman Brothers songs. They seemed to fit together, but wanted to all be interpreted a little bit differently. So with that in mind, it all came about pretty naturally. You know, I knew that I wanted, let's say, a different guitar sound than I had used on any of the prior projects. I knew I wanted a little cleaner, more traditional sort of sound. I went with vintage hollow body guitars for most of the record. I only played my Les Paul on 1 or 2 songs. And I went for a much more organic sort of old school approach throughout the entire process, but in some ways that's really no different than what we do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, Government Mule takes a very old school approach to recording. So do the Allman Brothers. All the projects that I'm involved in, we set up live on the floor and record all the music live as a unit as opposed to one step at a time. Some of the vocals on this record were live on the track. Most of them I went back and overdubbed, but the guitar solos and all the interplay is completely live on the floor. For me, that's the best way to record, especially if the music you're trying to make is based on improv.
The melodies and vocals, obviously, on this record take precedence over guitar. Like, your guitar is, I find, taking very much of a backseat on this record. It's very strong melodically and very strong, like, lyrically and vocally. Is that completely conscious? Like, did you physically pull back on the guitar? Or?
Well, I guess by Allman Brothers standards or Government Mule standards, I pulled back a little bit. By most standards, there's more than plenty of guitar playing. And we did make a point of keeping the long versions as opposing to shortening the songs or fading sooner, which I think a lot of people would have opted for. We felt like the fans of this kind of music want to hear everything that you played, and you know, I know it kind of harkens back to when I was a kid. I used to get angry when a song would fade out right as the band was really starting to rock. So I wanted to avoid that. So we basically gave people whatever it was that we created. But the vocal and the songs themselves seem to take a little bit more of a centerpiece role, I guess, which is apropos for this kind of music.
Absolutely, and then the record, it really comes through, like the funk elements and the soul elements. They're all really there, and it sounds really great. I was really enjoying that, enjoying listening to that last night. When you pick up a new piece of gear, a new guitar, or a new pedal, or a new toy, do you find it still inspires you, like plugging it in and feeling a different instrument? Like, do you find that it still springs ideas for you when you get new gear?
Well, I think it's important for any musician, especially guitar players, to respond to what they're hearing. So I learned a long time ago that the best way to approach what you're going to play is to base it on the sound that's coming out of your amplifier. So if you plug in a new pedal, if you plug in a new amp, a different guitar, tone change, whatever the case may be, it's best to play according to that sound. Yeah, I think it's kind of ridiculous to ignore your sound and just play as if you were preconceiving everything that you were going to play. I think most guitar players, especially that improvise for a living, would agree that you play a note, and how that note sounds is what tells you what the next note's going to be, you know. So I never know what I'm going to play until I just played it, and then I'm responding to what I just played. And not only to what I just played, but to what someone else on stage just played. You know, call and response is such a huge part of what we do. So if I play an opening riff and a solo, and then when I take a breath, the drummer or the bass player or the keyboard player or whoever plays something in that hole, that's what inspires me to play the next phrase. And I've also kind of learned through the years that what pops into your head can change based on the moment, you know, because you might think you're going to play a certain lick a certain way. Halfway through, something happens and it inspires you to change course, and you know, that's part of it too. But that's something that just comes about, I think, naturally from improvising. But back to your original question, the sound dictates that. You know, if you're playing with a very clean sound, you're not going to utilize a lot of sustain. If you're playing with a big sound that's feeding back, sometimes you might think that you're going to only hold a note for a second, but it might turn into 5 seconds based on the feedback. You know, so there's a million reasons to change what your thought process is.
So along the lines, though, of for instance, like, you know, if one of the companies that you work with sends you a new guitar and you're by yourself and you pull it out and you strap it on and you're playing it, does it bring, like, for a lot of musicians, it brings a new pure inspiration, because it's a new instrument, you're picking it up, you're hearing it acoustically for the first time, and do you find that it does that to you?
Yeah, I think anytime you pick up a different instrument or, again, plug in a pedal or a different amp, you're going to find yourself playing differently. And that's inspiring on its own. But it goes beyond that. I mean, if you're in a certain room and the room sounds a certain way, that is inspiring as well, you know. Anything that causes you to alter the course of your playing, that's some sort of inspiration. So if we're in a theater that has a nice reverb, then I'll tend to play according to that reverb more than I would if it was very dry sounding.
In your bio, it mentioned some of the people that you played with, and it mentioned James Hetfield. What was that like? What did you do, and what was that like?
Well, James and I first met, I had started reading interviews when the first Government Mule record came out, that he and Kirk Hammett were both big fans of our first record. And then a mutual friend of ours who was a tour accountant that had worked for the Allman Brothers and then started working for Metallica called me one day and said, "Hey, you know, the guys at Metallica are big fans, and they'd love to meet you." I was like, "That's really cool." And he said, "We're going to be playing Randall's Island for Lollapalooza." This is back in the 90s, mid to late 90s. And I live in New York, so he said they want to invite you out to the show. I said, okay. So I went and met the guys then. And then someone came up with the idea of James interviewing myself and Alan Woody for a Guitar World cover story. And so that was really the first time we got a chance to really become friends and kind of get to know each other, you know. And there's a lot more common interest there than some people might expect, you know. My influences are obviously all over the map, and most people know that it goes everywhere from Miles Davis to Led Zeppelin. But with James, I mean, we're talking about, he's a huge Skynyrd fan. He's a Waylon Jennings fan, and so I'm discovering this side of James that most people didn't know existed too. And that's always a good start for musicians to realize the depth of their influences, you know. And so we just stayed in touch through the years. He sang on this song called Driving Rain that Government Mule recorded. That originally they had asked me to write a song for this NASCAR compilation that was coming out. And I'm not a big NASCAR fan, but I knew James was, so I asked him if he wanted to be part of it, and he said yes. So we recorded this track with Les Claypool playing bass and James and I singing together. You know, it's been fun getting to know those guys, and Kirk and I are friends as well. Kirk has played with Government Mule on stage, and I mean, I've been fortunate to have played on stage or in the studio with so many people that I either grew up listening to or look up to. You know, the list is pretty frightening, and I'm honored and don't take that lightly.
James is an extremely well-versed man and a very good musician, good guitar player. You know, very, very understated, and a lot of people don't know that he's as good as he is. Based on your last answer, if you could give young musicians that are struggling through trying to make it in music, what would be your words of wisdom?
I don't know if I have wisdom. I have advice. I would say that don't get in the music business unless you're absolutely sure that's what you want to do for the rest of your life. Don't make it a business unless you're obsessed with it. It's much better as a hobby and a sense of enjoyment and enlightenment without putting the pressure of having to, at some point, raise a family on a musician's salary and lifestyle. Having said that, if you're going to do it, you have to give 110% all the time and still know that at any minute it could collapse. From a musical perspective, listen to as many different types of music as possible. Find the best in each genre and study it to no end.